John, are we live? Are we live now?
Are we live? I think so. I think you got it done.
I think yes. I had a little bit delayed intro there. Getting all excited, trying to make a more epic, and I gotta jump in. Good morning, everybody, for another Wake Up and Deliver episode 25. Yes, John, I keep track, and it is the right number. I know you.
Yeah, I'm gonna give it to you now because you definitely are following the right sequence. So.
And I put the dates in, and I make sure everything is right. And you help me out with the descriptions. It's a team effort. We're doing fantastic. 25 is actually a pretty cool number. I think
it is a good number.
It's a good way, almost halfway there. Next week's halfway through doing it for a year.
Yeah. That's I wasn't expecting that one. You're right. There you go.
Right.
Yeah, it's funny how it builds, man. Like the newsletter I do too. I think I'm like 37 done now, so next week's 38 or whatever. You just keep doing it every week, and all of a sudden you're like, oh wow, there's a lot there.
There's a lot there, a lot of content that you can use, right? All right,
yeah.
We're doing some coffee for the morning, some brain food to get us started. We love seeing John's reaction. I know when I say we, it's everybody, especially me. John, here's the quote. I see your face on this one because it's going to be important. The lazy lose to the average lose to the focused lose to the obsessed.
Wow, that one's not bad. And funny enough, it's going to roll right into my question I had for you this morning. That's really serendipitous for everybody today, because I also sometimes like to pick up something that I was ranty about over the weekend, or that I saw, or that kind of pissed me off, and I'm like, oh, I'm going to drop it on you. I'm going to see your reaction and tell me what you think. So that one actually is really apt. Yeah, I think that's really true, right? There's a I don't know, it's like I saw some video once, and it was kind of this concept about, the guy just said, how you do anything is how you do everything. Mm-hmm. And it's along those lines. It's just the fact that, like, whatever your standards are and stuff like that. Like, I've got people around me all the time that are always like, oh, your standards are, like, you're ridiculous. You always expect too much. And sometimes people frame that as like a bad thing. And I do think that in some ways, if you always have these high expectations, or you have these wild levels of what you feel is a good standard, it can be interesting when you're working with a team. But honestly, I've never felt that having like higher standards, or pushing those standards higher, was really that detrimental. Because to your point, that the more that that higher standard, the more you reach, the more that you really kind of want to hit those levels of excellence, usually it pays off.
I think the person who looks at someone who's obsessed always thinks it's obsession, because they have such great focus, and it's a little bit, almost a bit of just. I know I always have, when someone's really focused and obsessed about something, I'm always like, how do I get to that level? How do I get so engulfed in something that it just takes my whole day, and then I just want to be doing it all the time? I guess me being logistically obsessed is logistics is my obsession.
But you know what? But but you bring up a good point, though, because the thing is that I actually think that the people, when you're in that state, you don't really realize how obsessed you are, because for you that content, or that work effort, or whatever it is, feels very natural.
Yeah.
It only seems obsession to someone else who's like, oh, that's not important to me, because then it would be such a stretch for them to do that work. So I would offer, you're probably more obsessed with certain things than you think, because it really comes down to how much you're thinking about it, how much you would go to do it, how much you would check on something, all of these types of things. I get all the time being like, oh, you really think about that a lot. And that's like, yeah, I guess.
And it's surprising. It usually does surprise me. But we do have a good morning. I want to give a shout out to Mr. Merrick. He says good morning to us. He says get up and get at her. Wake up and deliver. Thank you so much. And for everybody else that's listening, as always, thanks for joining. We don't see as much unless you comment now. So if you are here, you want to say good morning, do say it. We do see it. I know there's a little bit of a delay sometimes when we're talking. We'd love to see everybody saying hello. John, your segue, your question, my reaction. I gotta go deadpan.
Well, it's a thought. It's a little bit of a thought thing. So you have to. It's not just a shock value thing. But I've been. So that all that some of the work anyway that I do is with smaller companies and startups and stuff like that. So I have a lot of people on my feed that are founders and things like that. And, I see stuff that they comment on or they like or people they're connected to, whatever. And, I keep seeing this frame that I feel is honestly just full of shit. And we'll see if you agree or not. So, again, saw another one last night, which is this like kind of like quote unquote big shot VC style person that's talking about all of the things that founders need to do and all of the things that will immediately scratch them off his
I love
golden
these guys.
list. Yeah. These fucking guys that you look through their history and you find out that they haven't done anything in 20 years other than be in investments. Anyways, but the point was is that he was like, oh, here's all the reasons I'll scratch a founder off my list immediately. And, the general theme of this post was like, you have to just grind, you have to pay yourself no money, and you have to be basically working, like Elon Musk wants people now for Doge at like 80 hours a week with no pay. And, I just think that this frame is getting absurd because honestly, VCs and VC funds don't care at all about the problem that you're solving. Their only interest is how likely is it that I can put money in to extract a ton of money out as quickly as possible. So their advice is not about the best way to run that business, is not the best way to set up an operation or something that's really sustaining. It's not the healthiest for the team. It's what's going to catch the most attention as quickly as possible so someone else will come in and maybe buy it or whatever, and then they get some big return. And I just think that it's crazy that, we're creating these cultures where people are killing themselves for these VCs who don't care anything about them other than the fact that there's some multiplier on an investment. So that's my thought.
I think I would disagree with you to a point there. So I don't know. I don't like the blanket statement. I think there's a lot of VCs out there who have an area of interest and they have a passion for it and they want to put money into it and they care less about the extraction of the money in the end, but more about the problem. That's why they're in that VC area because they want to create a mechanism to solve the problems in those areas and get it moving. And there's obviously VCs like you talk about where it's just a mega firm that has lots of money that is there just to turn in and out. So there's definitely a bit of what you're saying, but I think there's a lot of VCs out there that aren't vocal, that do focus on the problems and really want you to succeed.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So here's a challenge for you, and I don't want you to name names,
okay.
But out of all of the logistics tech that we see, the VCs and stuff around the logistics kind of or operations world, do you feel that you see more that actually have an operational understanding and really know the grind and have a proper expectation for the grind? Or do you think that there's just a bunch of people pouring money into something that they see as an opportunity? Because my personal experience is that I've come across very few, very, very few people who are making investments that actually know what it takes to get stuff done daily in operations.
I would challenge you on that in the idea that the humble VCs and the ones that are actually solving the problems are less vocal about it. They're less going to be on any social media. They're less likely to be saying something about it. The ones that are your style, that you're thinking, are the ones I would say the 80%ers that are always going to be showcasing something. So I think there's a whole slew of VCs out there and a whole bunch of tech out there for logistics who don't have a social media presence. They don't have a LinkedIn presence. They don't have any. They're just out there solving the problem and doing what they need to do to get it done. And I can think of a few examples. And again, we're not going to name any names, but I didn't know about them. I got to meet the owners and they got some VC money and they've been doing it and they're doing fantastic. But like you ask around, not a lot of people know about them because they have a specific niche to the problem they're solving.
Okay. But then fair enough. If these people though then are not being vocal, right? And that's fair. I mean, everyone's got their own reasons to do it or not do it or whatever. But that would suggest that the vast majority of the content, the guidance, the information that you're seeing out there is coming from people that may fit more of the profile of what I'm saying. Which to me, those aren't the people that are going to get things done. Like I watched this person's post, and the person that responded from my network is in an operational world. And I can tell you that building an operational company with this guy's advice, if you can get out and before killing everybody in your team, you're going to be lucky, because realistically, you're building a house of cards trying to run operations based on this person's advice.
Yeah, and that's why like certain advice is out there, and I think I don't know if you follow. I think you do. Linus, the guy that talks a lot about AI, and
Yeah.
other. He made a great point. He had like a picture of what people know about AI, and there's like the AI expert, and he has all this knowledge, but he's on LinkedIn. The bar is very tiny, and then the self-proclaimed AI expert has no knowledge and has a giant LinkedIn presence on it. He goes, you got to be careful who you trust out there on the knowledge that you're getting on AI. Just because you see someone reoccurringly on there talking about something doesn't mean that the product expert on the topic. And I feel it's the same thing in motivation and leadership. A lot of people create this persona of it, and then you shouldn't necessarily follow it. I think a lot of it comes down to you got to do what's best for yourself and what you think is best for your company, especially if you're uh, you own the company. You do what's best, what you feel is best for the company, and that's why you're in that spot. Because if you wanted to listen to everybody else, you'd be working for somebody. Right?
No, but if those are the only people that have given you money, you get yourself into a tight spot.
And then you're gonna butt heads, and you're gonna be like, "Listen, this is the direction. You want my knowledge on this aspect. You be able to put your foot down, right? Be like, this is what I believe." Because the last thing you want is regret, and everything everybody always says is, "Don't have regret." But let's move on, John. Segue to something more logistically. That is logistics, but more in tune. There's a lot of friction. It feels like in the last week. A lot of great topics. Anything that comes to mind? I know tariffs has been a very common conversation. People are like, yes, tariffs, no tariffs. And then there was the conversation, even what's his name sent it over to me, Rob sent it over to me this morning, how Trump was already talking about closing a lot of loopholes from crossing for Temu and Shein from across the border from Mexico. There's going to be a lot of those changes, especially coming in the next year. What's your take?
Um, yeah, you know what? I think that there's probably a fair level of risk there, in the sense that I think that there's probably quite a need and desire to oh, Chris Jarvis just said good morning. Hey, Chris. Chris, actually, sorry, Rand, they've been doing some great stuff. I've noticed their content from ecom with Chris and Lookman coming out, but that was anyways random, just because I've noticed a bunch of videos this weekend and they've been doing a good job with Canada Post. But to your point, yeah, I think he'll have to. I think he really wants to make a splash, so to speak.
Yep.
So I definitely think there could be something there. And then that kind of pairs, interestingly enough. And now I got to find it because I saw it last night. I was going to bring it up, but there is a bunch of Chinese investment going into infrastructure in, let's call it like South/Latin America or whatever. And they just opened one of the largest um, ports now just outside of Lima. I don't know, 20 kilometers to 40 or something like that, 40 kilometers maybe. And it's got the US really uncomfortable, because they're like, wow, there is encroaching foreign infrastructure very, very close to the continental US. And, this particular port, it was obviously brand new. It is brand new. It just opened this weekend, or right at the end of last week. Automation systems, all kinds of stuff. It literally shaves 10 days off a particular transit time, and also allows vessels to skip certain. Oh, there we go. Peru. Yeah, thank you. Look at you. You didn't even know that I was going to talk about that one. And it shaves 10 days off, and actually allows people to sidestep certain ports based on the way they want to bring stuff into particular parts of North America. And one of the ports that could be impacted by this is actually Los Angeles, which is obviously one of the biggest and busiest ports in the US. So what are your thoughts on this concept of like these massive infrastructure investments, whether it's from China or maybe even India at some point, as they're continuing to build out their their sort of presence with obviously their
I
economic position.
think that is taking a playbook out of history from what the Americans did 100 years ago and how they expanded their dominance in the world. And I think it's a better way. Focus on the logistics of it. Make transactions and trade a lot easier. Focus on liberalizing trade was always the agenda for the longest time, and isolationism was always kind of the opposite way. And so the investment into ports, roads, I think is always the way to go about it, because it opens up the ability to get into markets that you weren't part of before. And they did it for the longest time, but I think it got segued somewhere in the 90s, and then because they didn't have a counterbalance to kind of counter against. And I think China kind of took that playbook and is doing lots of things across Asia, building was it the Jade Road or the I forget the name of the term that they used to build the railroads all the way into Europe. They have the ports that they're building in Africa, the ports they're building in South America. The big one that a lot of people don't even talk about is in like Guyana, where they found lots of oil, fastest growing economy in the world. And they're building lots of ports that China was in there beforehand, and they found the oil, and all of a sudden Americans are feeling a little bit uncomfortable that they're so close to their own backyard. It's because they're investing in these infrastructures and putting on these leases for 100 years, 200, 300 years, and owning those ports. They have it in Greece. It's very smart of them to do it that way, because then they hold the ability to trade.
So then here's like the extension of that for pretty much business and economy and whatever. And you know that I'm a proponent, and I always believe that there's a big value in assets. And I think that this type of stuff, when you're having the infrastructure and stuff, and I wrote about this a few weeks ago in my newsletter, and just saying that, like, if you think anyone's investing billions of dollars to then allow themselves to sort of be dwindled away over time, like, you're kind of lying to yourself. The reality is these investments are being made, but it's long-term thinking. And there's a very, intentional and purposeful strategy being put in place with people who are investing in this infrastructure. Because right now, all the rage with startups and small little disruptive players is obviously asset light stuff. But at the end of the day, someone needs the assets. Like, someone has to be doing the work, and to push to these levels of excellence. Like I'm just gonna say it straight out. Like, I'm sorry, but like, your like gig delivery network, what I mean, whether it's on a bulk transportation side or a last mile side or whatever, or even some of these pop up like gig style or transactional warehouse opportunities, they meet a type of need, and they provide a certain type of access, but they most certainly will never be able to compete with these massive infrastructure builds with highly controlled environments that are intentionally and purpose built for high volume and really high levels of excellence and performance. And I think you're really seeing that. Like, right now there might be a bit of a lull, but I think it's going to be real messy like 5 years from now, when everything's really catching up to the haves versus the have-nots when it comes to infrastructure, access, and assets.
Yeah, Cynthia had a great question for us. Opening a port in Lima is fair. The de minimis is not fair and has proven to contain contraband that has killed Americans and can destroy our AG and innovation. Yeah,
look, do I think that thing needs to be set at $800? No, but that's a very different time. I think what I would offer, though, is that this concept that a lot of people talk about the de minimis rules for the US, but every country actually has something similar. Canada's is actually $15. But I mean, the point being is that nobody planned for a level of activity that we're seeing today, where people will buy a $6 hair clip, which is funny for me to say. My kids have just been all over that, so that's why I tell my mind. But like, we'll buy a silly hair clip and have it shipped like halfway around the world. Like, that was never expected. Like nobody expected it. And like everything now, like the laws and the regulations and stuff are scrambling to try to keep up. Which they, whether it's in e-commerce or normal type of business or whatever. Typically, legislation, regulation is always slower than rapid change or quote unquote loopholes. And that's why people can take advantage of them and can take advantage of them for so long. But I mean, the option isn't about like you'd be like, just cut it off. Like just completely cut it off. My opposing thought to that would also be, it's like, okay, well, there's one thing on the imports, but let's not pretend that all of these like American or Canadian companies aren't just using contract manufacturing, completely outsourced labor to those countries anyway. It's not like they're competing against homegrown goods or anything like that. Like, they're using the same people. They're just mad now about the fact that, for them, their model brings it in, warehouses it, does whatever, as opposed to the fact that, they're just shipping straight direct now because they somehow got enough volume to make it work.
Yeah, I think there's a preconception there that it's all these non-North American companies that are using these outlets and these loopholes. I think a majority of it is Canadian American companies figure out the loopholes and have pushed their manufacturing into China and Asia, and are using now that ability to bring that product back, and then using different methods to be able to do that. And that's what we're seeing today, right? I don't think it's 100% like as a them versus us. It's definitely a mixture of businesses trying to find the best way to make the most profit in what they can. And a lot of it really comes down to is the dollar store. You can go to a dollar store and get a whole bunch of cheap stuff. And that's what I thought we talked about a few weeks ago. That was interesting is, can we see something like TikTok or Temu or Shein buying something like the Dollar General or any of those dollar stores, and then using that as an outlet to start circumventing it because they have enough capital to do that. Is that something that we can see come into a play, or building a whole bunch of like these micro warehouses, or using a whole bunch of old stores and turning them into a giant little, micro warehouses, like buy up all the Sears that have gone out of business and use those as little centers to buy all this stuff based off of what's popular, or knowing based on the algorithm what's going to be popular and picking it up. And then even kind of loop it back into what we talked about, you and I, and Justin, when we had the podcast, which I did the post this morning, is using different technologies to kind of move forward certain products where, hey, I know my neighbor bought this hair, or John's daughters bought this hair clip this week. Who else on that street has daughters the same age who might want the same hair clip? Now you can get it for less. Hey, John, you got a discount on your hair clip because 5 other people in your area now have bought the same hair clip. And then it brings down the prices, right? There's other innovative ways to kind of come across and how to reduce it. Going back to our original piece, I don't think tariffs is always the way to kind of do it. And to kind of mitigate
because people are always going to find a way, right? Like in sense of like trying to find the next way to change something. And there's another comment there about like the de minimis and like certain things like fentanyl. For sure. Look, the reality is that whether it's fentanyl, whether it's low quality goods or something that's got too much of X, Y, or Z, the reality is those things are coming into the country simply because of the fact that people know that they are overwhelming the system with volume. You know what I mean? That's where that's actually coming in. You know what I mean when you're talking about those things. I mean, it's no different than you and I a few weeks ago. We were kind of joking around about possibly talking about a rash of sort of Canadian truck drivers that there was a string of different things that were they were being arrested for having cocaine and importing cocaine, and that really came from, again, just the pure volume and the borders and certain degrees of acceptance. Because when I was in the cash and transit industry, like I can tell you, like when we were shipping stuff on planes and stuff like that, at some point that you get to these levels where, like, yeah, for the stuff that we were doing, it was high trust, you had to apply, you had all of these things, blah blah blah, whatever. But it did allow you to skip scans. Like that was part of the deal, is that you took on the responsibility and stuff like that, and you would be able to move past certain gates. Not because you were doing anything wrong, but that was part of the program. You could be vetted and trusted and all of these things. But now you're getting the same kind of problem. It's no different than, I know this is going to sound silly, but like the reality is, get away from the de minimis and whatever. There's all kinds of gray operations right now, especially as cannabis. Like, cannabis is a good example, as it was becoming legal in Canada, and there was more of this like gray zone about whether or not like there would be any real issue if you got caught with it. Or what you were doing with it. People were sending that through the mail all the time. They would vax seal it and they would send it through the mail. So it's like, I agree that, look, there's potential for abuse, but I think it's more about the system than it is like, there's nothing about the de minimis that causes bad actor. People are just taking advantage of a system. Like it's not the de minimis. It's like, oh, that's why there's fentanyl coming into the country or something like that.
You can argue the same thing about bonded carriers, like you were saying to your point earlier. You know, bonded carriers are supposed to be carriers that are more trusted and are able to do certain things, and often people abuse that. But you know, let's not dwell on that topic too long.
Well, but hold on. There's another cool comment here. Just talking about, you know, that they were talking a number of months ago about using retail spaces for warehouses, for TikTok and other goods, and use as a pop-up shop. So I actually, you know, that kind of stuff is what I think is very, very cool these days. And I love seeing the comment. I love seeing that kind of innovation where people are really thinking about, like, how do you get more use out of opportunity? Because our economy, whether people like it or not, is going to shift towards a much more cyclic and sort of like flat, like I'll call it like flash in the pan, but I mean, like, whether it's drop culture or whatever, people are going to be clamoring for different types of products, for example, that are limited issue, that, you know, have a very small amount of product, and just trying to push these always through the, like, traditional means is really going to miss an opportunity when it comes to potential customer experiences, whatever. I think a year ago, yeah, I could show you that post that I made about, like, doing a pop-up truck on a modified trailer or something like that. Same kind of thing is that, you know, create these new ways for people to interact with different products and different brands in different ways, because the biggest thing that's going to become a driver of retail in general is, and it's not new, but you know, it's an extension of word of mouth, where it's like people aren't just going to talk about, like, oh, this was a really good experience or whatever. They're going to want to share those experiences together. They're going to want to tell their friends. Their friends are going to want to have those stories to share with their, like, sort of groups. So I agree. So I will say your name, but I'm terrible with names. So I'm hoping it's just Benjara. But if it's not, you'll have to let me know, because I can't. I'm the worst with names. Like, it's probably the only thing that gives me anxiety in life.
I'll give you 2 points on that, and I agree with you. A few years ago, I was looking at it because here up in Canada, I think it was a Home Sense or Home something. Home Outfitters went out of business. And I was looking for warehouse spaces, so I was talking to a lot of real estate, commercial real estate, and I was asking what would it take to convert those into, like, mini warehouses, because they're in spots that you can have it, and it didn't take much. It all depended on the city and what you were able to do. A lot of them turning them into a storefront, where majority of it's a warehouse, and you have this kind of storefront where you're able to sell some of the product. Would have been an easier route.
Well, but that's that new Best Buy store I showed you.
Yep.
That I posted about. That's the same concept. It's probably 2080 in terms of retail space versus warehouse.
Yeah, and that's the great idea, because, like I've said before, like when you and I talked about this, when you walk into even a Best Buy, I'm not odd anymore about the amount of product it is. For me, it's about how easily I can get that product and find it. So I can even look on the screen. If I can just click in it, an auto store brings me that product right in front of me. To me, that'd be a far better experience than not, for me personally.
Well,
I don't like seeing the majority of it, because there's a lot of wasted space. I'm not saying that there shouldn't be some of that aspect. Even we talked about the grocery store experience, where, you know, there's certain things that you want to be able to touch and look at. You want the meat section to be big. You want the produce section to be big. But the canned goods and the cereals, you really don't need to look at it. That could be in a position where, as I'm walking in, I go, hey, these are the things I want in my basket on the way out. Have it ready for me. I'm going to take my time picking out my fruits and my vegetables.
Wow. There's a bit of psychology there, though, because I could almost guarantee you that, like, those products on the shelf that have smaller, like, and this is just, like, inherently, like, people's belief, right? So it's like, if some person went and they bought 8 feet of shelf space versus a person that bought one foot, you know, more people are going to see it, but there's going to be a psychological thing of being like, oh, this one must be better. It's got so much space. They're pushing so much more volume. I got to grab it. I don't disagree with you that
I think there's less and less of it, though.
Maybe.
You even said it last week with the Whole Foods. You're like, look at the organics. They're not that much more nutritional.
I don't think that they're necessarily there. What I was going to say is that I think that there's an interesting line between, like, and I've shared this a lot now for a number of years, and people always kind of, like, struggle with trying to really, like, wrap their head around it or not believe it's true. But what I call, like, transactional retail versus experiential retail. Mm-hmm. And, like, what you're talking about there about essentially being able to use a screen or do some type of click and collect, that's, like, obviously purely transactional. So it works great for anyone that really knows what they want. I think it does miss a huge opportunity for, like, you know, getting people to experience, work, touch, convert if they were unsure. I think that it makes it very hard. And if you want to play, but if you want to play in transactional, yeah, but if you want to play in transactional retail, you have to be like gold standard for operational excellence. Because
when's the last time you went to a retail store or any store and had a phenomenal experience where you're like, I need to buy this product? It happens less and less often.
But I agree.
It was like the standard. You'd walk into any store, the salesperson was on point. Hey, you and I have talked about this, and I know I've been saying this often in this podcast, but Future Shop, that was the whole thing. Like we were in there, we had to sell it. We were knowledgeable on the product. How many times have I walked into a store now and I want something? They're like, here, let me pull it up and let me read about it for you. Like, I can do that too.
Oh, I agree, but that's what I'm saying is that like a lot of retail right now has turned their they think their operations is like that they have a good store operation just because of the fact that like there's boxes there that they can move through the cash, which is like there's just a disconnect between the fact of like, guys, like that's the basics. It's like what we talk about in a lot of the work that we do. It's like, I don't care if you have like picture proof of delivery. I don't care if you have tracking. I don't care if it's GPS, because you know why? All expected. Yep. So you know what I mean? Like these types of things. What I actually think is sad is honestly straight up. And if there's anyone watching or whatever in the comments later, just kind of tell me. I actually can't think of someone that I actually really believe does a good job with experiential retail. You can have crazy retail, like luxury retail, where it goes really wild or something like that. But I'm talking about just like a positive experience. Even the last time that I went into a store where they were trying really hard, way over engaged, way too pushy, you know, it was actually uncomfortable with how bad they were approaching people. And to your point, that's one of the big things that I think is lost so much these days. Because when you and I worked at Future Shop, and guys, oddly enough, Matt and I worked in the same city, even though we're not from the same city originally. And we worked at competing stores, and we didn't even know that until, you know,
at the
same time, until like last year. Yeah, we didn't know each other. But funny enough, like that experience of like the fact that we were on commission and we had the potential to make a lot of money directly translated into the quality of the experience, because everybody understood that you would do better in the ways that you would manage the customers. So I don't think that there's too many stores that are doing it. Apple might be one of the better ones, but even then I think it's a little overdone. But I would say that all of these stores, that all they do is slam product onto the floor. It's either like a hot mess or there's like no sense. Like I even the other day, something as simple as this. I walked into a store and it wasn't clear enough, like what was in what section and why. And people think that this is like, well, no, we want you to browse the store. No, it's like, get some visual management, get some structure there, help direct people, make those barriers to engagement much lower, because that improvement in experience will make them feel better and they'll spend more money.
I'm going to take the last couple of words and I'll let you kind of finish off the week. So I got a side message from Kat, who's afraid to kind of, not afraid, I shouldn't say afraid, who is not joining us. And when I'm going to get her up one of these days. She tried getting up a few weeks ago, but I didn't see her in the studio.
Oh yeah, I know. That was a fail.
Aritzia, she says, is a fantastic experience. Great customer service, extremely knowledgeable. I've never been, so I would take that as
well. So as an example, Kat, so Aritzia was one of the, so I walked in there yesterday. No, was it yesterday? No, Saturday. Right? Saw something in the window. Oh, that looks cool. I was with my kids and stuff like that. Oh, that looks cool. They go to walk in. Do you think that jacket that draws you in from the aisle, like from the aisle, was there? It was not. You could not find it. I looked around. So to me, I agree that they probably do a little bit better job, but to me that's such a simple example of operational execution in a retail environment. It's like you've put something in the window to draw people in, and someone walked in because of that and couldn't find it.
I'm going to get in shit here in a second.
Am I in?
You're in. Oh, you're live.
Guys, oh my God, I'm live.
Yeah. Did you just pull her in? Like, did you just yank her in?
No, you know what? I decided I'm not good. No, I'm gonna spare everybody of my morning look, so I'm just gonna be on audio. But yeah, Aritzia, honestly, every time, and it's been my experience for a while now. I'm a big fan of theirs quality and for customer service as well. But every single time, I'll just walk in and be like, "This is what I'm looking for. I don't have time or don't feel like browsing the entire store." And then they would just pull up a bunch of clothes, and it's exactly what I wanted. And they're so knowledgeable. about their product, everything, the new arrivals, past season, whatever it is, and they're super knowledgeable. But then it sucks for me because then I end up buying the whole thing. So
yeah, and Aritzia is not exactly like your value retailer.
Yeah. So I mean, exactly. So I mean that's honestly that is pretty much especially nowadays. Like I mean, I've gone to Zara and H&M and nobody seemed to really care. They're just there. I mean, sorry if I don't want to speak badly about those retailers, but hands down, Aritzia, every single time they do not fail me.
We are popular today, John. We have Bill.
I see that, Bill.
I am.
Matt, you can kick me out now. It's fine.
No, you're staying to the end now. You're with us.
I've done my part.
Look at this. Not only did you deliver unexpectedly with like bringing Kat on, you've now added Bill. We didn't even know about the four. You're just rolling today with like the tech excellence.
Look at this, Bill. You had some good stuff for me this morning. What do you bring for our final thoughts here? Because we're a little bit over, but we have great content, so let's keep going.
No, I just like watching you and John. I think you guys are both brilliant. I really like the different aspects you take and look at our holistic view of supply chains. The one thing I have found is that generally when I engage with you guys or watch these, it makes me think about things a different way. You know, when you look at when I first met Matt, and Matt, of course, you introduced me to John, no question about that, indirectly and directly. And when John first started with the Walmart stuff, of course, I was fascinated because I always believed that with their infrastructure and everything else, that even though e-commerce, when we first dealt with them out of Kansas City and everything else, what John has alluded to, they had some challenges. But now when you look at it, what the things that John brought forward and that Matt, that you have done as well, I just think it's impressive as to the platform they have and the ability to build off of that to become truly one of the giants in the e-commerce platform. And in addition to that, when I saw the article today, because you guys have been talking about Temu and Shein and everything else like that, and some of the challenges it may bring. And as it would have it, last week, one of our top agents was in the office. Has been talking about how he's been using this Shein and Temu, and he bought an electric chainsaw with an 8-inch long blade.
Yeah.
Right? And he got it delivered for $19 Canadian.
Yeah.
Now, some of the things he's received, so if you see the knapsack here,
yes.
So he's always liked my knapsack. That came from CP at a golf tournament. He tried to order the exact same knapsack from Shein. When it came in, it's about this big. It looks identical, but it's this big. Now, of course, it cost him $11. That should have been your first clue. You weren't buying a duffel bag like this one with a knapsack in. But it's interesting to see the articles what's going on today with those mini shipments. I don't know if you guys have had a chance to dig into them, but I know that's why I was sending it over to you guys, because with this announcement, they're already after these lowballing people dumping retail into the North American, but mostly the U.S. market. The focus is the Democrats were already looking at what do they deal with it. Now we've got Trump with tariffs and everything else coming. So, it seems like inevitably they're going to try and shut these services down. But then to find out today that they're using this, I call it mini-me the way it's been written in the article I sent, right? But these small shipments that they're using to become the next bad actor around, so never mind double brokering and everything else, they're now sending in fraudulent, bad products and everything else. And to see it go from 2.5 million packages a day to 4 million a day, and then Jersey said they're getting like 750,000 sometimes every hour. Yep. So it's incredible the way the market is changing and what you guys are looking at. I just find it fascinating and interesting every day as to how this is changing and what does the landscape look like in 3 to 6 months from now. Are these people shut down or do they expand their footprint?
Well, but here's the scary thing though. Amazon Haul just launched, right? Which is the same thing. So now all of a sudden, it's not just about like, the US versus like sort of China or versus these particular retailers. Now all of a sudden you've got Amazon being like this massive endorser for the fact that, hey, consumers want this value, which I think is going to add a lot of complexity to the conversation, because the reality is the biggest thing, whether it's Haul or Shein or Temu or whatever, is that they're operating on something that Walmart and Costco did for a long time, which was value for price, but they've just taken it to the point now, even with your bag, is that like, your colleague or your friend, for example, might not, oh, it was $11 or whatever, and it didn't matter. Or that chainsaw that's $19. And if it dies in a year, his thought isn't going to be like, oh, what a piece of junk product. It was like, it was $20 as if it lasted a year, right? Like even my youngest daughter will sometimes see that. And she said to me the other day in the parking lot, oh, Dad, why don't you just order this from Temu? They're giving it away for free. I'm like, no. It's like, no, we're not going to do that. But like, it's really crazy how these concepts are penetrating the much younger generation, especially, and it's just going to create this expectation and this desire to hold this value proposition. And I think it's going to get really messy with some of that.
I agree, and especially depending on if they decide to hide and they go into a network like Amazon to hide, it'll be that much more difficult for anybody to figure out exactly sourcing and where it's coming from in certain cases. So you're not wrong. And it's interesting because you're right. There's no question the younger generation is certainly driving it. And as a result, even if the younger generation doesn't have money, that means they're using mom and dad's money to drive it. I may be the touchy-feely kind of guy, still like retail stores, that kind of stuff. Matt knows all of this about me. I don't pretty much hide who I am at the end of the day. So I may not be that way, but my wife, she's 3 years younger than I am, so she's certainly, in that still upper end. The way she shops online now is unbelievable the way it's changed.
Mm-hmm. And honestly, they're only making it easier, right? Actually, the EU is going after some of these people, not for just their product, but they're for the actual gamification of the apps, that they've actually made them very addictive and stuff like that. Like even my partner, for example, she was shopping on there, and she was like, she doesn't even like to retail shop, and she was like, oh my God, I ended up buying X, Y, and Z because the wheel kept spinning and gave me this. And if I took something out, it actually took discounts away. That was very, very heavily gamified, which becomes its own problem. And that was part of what I even shared yesterday on the newsletter, was about some of these dark trends that now could be really amplified with AI and stuff like that, which I thought was very interesting, because I always love staying current on these things. But time will tell about how it's going, and things are definitely changing. But, I think it's fair to say that the lines between, sort of value, customer experience, connected, community, and all of these things are getting very, very blurry.
Yeah, I agree with that statement. At the same time, the only one, when you look at the article, which I'm sure Matt will share over to you as well, John, my only concern on that article is not the fact, because you're absolutely right. If somebody's paying $8 to $12 for something delivered, and it's not exactly what they wanted, it's going in the circular files, we used to call it. I don't know what everybody calls a garbage can today, but that's basically what's going to happen, as opposed to a return. In the old days, people, could walk into Sears, I don't like this, and return things. With the online shopping, what I'm seeing is most people just discard stuff rather than try and go back through a return process. So they actually get to win on that platform by selling it cheap enough that nobody looks at ever thinking about sending it back.
Well, and quite frankly, they do everything they can to make people feel that throwing it out is the best option. You know what I mean? They don't want really to deal with returns, and as because they're unfortunately not really concerned about the impact that it has on the planet.
But just sorry to interrupt, guys. We are at the 15 past mark. We're going to be conscious of everybody's time. I know we're going and getting great into it. Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Kat, for coming up and joining us up here. As always, you're more than welcome to come join us every week. Next week, Monday.
Anyone is? It's an open link.
It's an open link to anybody, as always. I am going to say thank you again. I'm going to remove you guys here. Thanks, Bill. I'll send John the letter as well, the link for him. Thanks, Kat, for joining us. Now, John, close off the thoughts, because I let it go for 15 minutes. I know I'm the moderator here, sometimes self-proclaimed. What is the closing thoughts for everybody for the week?
You know what? I don't think I have a lot of closing thoughts, other than the fact that I think probably right now is the time that everyone needs to be very honest and open with themselves, and be tracking their sales, and really not leaning too heavily on some kind of major shift unless you really know that something is going to shift. So, there's a lot of talk about excessive inventory, slow movers, this and that. So you're probably better off to take action sooner rather than later, because the more that everybody waits, the more you're just going to sort of drown out into what everybody is trying to do to either liquidate or move stuff very quickly at the last minute.
Yeah, don't panic. Don't panic buy, and don't panic hold. Really think it through, and as always, talk to your logistics providers. They know a thing or two. Thanks everybody for joining today. It was a fantastic interaction as always. This will be live right after on our YouTube and our LinkedIn. By all means, come join us every week and have a great one. Bye, everybody.